Fayetteville, West Virginia, Christmas Eve, 1945. Snow on the ground, quiet roads, and the height of the holiday season. Inside their two-story wooden home, George and Jenny Sodder were settling in for the night with 9 of their 10 children. George had built a comfortable life for his large family as an independent coal truck operator, running heavy loads out of the local Appalachian mines to provide for his household. For a family of 12, domestic life is loud, chaotic, and above all, deeply routine. The Sodders had security. As the clock ticked toward midnight, they had absolutely no reason to suspect that routine was about to be completely dismantled. At around midnight, George and Jenny woke to a distinct heavy thud on their roof. Something had hit the house and rolled down the shingles. A few minutes later, the telephone downstairs began to ring. George went to answer it, but heard nothing but static and dead air. He hung up. The phone rang again. This time, George heard an unfamiliar woman laughing hysterically on the other end before the line clicked dead. As George stood in the hallway trying to process the strange calls, he smelled smoke. He turned to find his office and the ground floor sitting room rapidly filling with a wall of intense orange flames. With the heat rising fast, George, Jenny, and 4 of their children managed to force their way out through the ground-level windows into the freezing night air. But 5 of their children, Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty, were trapped in the bedrooms upstairs. George tried to rush the main staircase, but the wooden steps were already completely consumed by the fire. He could do nothing but watch. By sunrise, the Sodder family home had collapsed into a smoldering basement of ash. Their old life was entirely gone. When investigators sifted through the charred ruins, they determined the fire started from faulty wiring, a tragic accident. Officially, the state concluded that the 5 missing children died in their beds, their bodies entirely cremated by the intense heat of the blaze. This chart highlights a severe problem with that conclusion. A standard wood-framed house fire burns at a peak of about 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit. Total cremation of human bone requires sustained temperatures of over 2,000 degrees for a minimum of 2 hours. Even in massive industrial fires, fragments of bone and teeth survive. But when the Sodders and private investigators sifted through the basement dirt, they found absolutely 0 traces of human remains. The total absence of remains shifts the narrative away from fire-based tragedy toward a deliberate act of interference. As George examined the property the morning after the fire, he realized the heavy wooden ladder he kept leaning against the side of the house was missing. It hadn't burned. Searchers found it dumped at the bottom of an embankment 75 feet away, proving someone had deliberately dragged it off the property before the fire even started. Soon after, an eyewitness came forward. A neighbor reported seeing an unfamiliar station wagon parked along Highway 21, watching the house burn. Another witness claimed they saw several individuals carrying large, bundled shapes out of the Sodder house and loading them into a vehicle. With this context, the bizarre events leading up to the fire take on a different shape. The heavy thud on the roof and the erratic phone calls look less like random anomalies and more like deliberate tactical distractions. When these instances of physical sabotage are linked to the missing biological remains, the fire starts to look less like the cause of death and more like a diversion to mask an abduction. 4 years later, in 1949, George Sodder received an envelope in the mail with no return address. Inside was a single photograph. It showed a young man whose facial structure closely matched Maurice, their eldest missing son. On the back, a cryptic handwritten note read, "Louis Sodder, I love brother Frankie, I lil boys, A90132 or 35. Armed with this lead, George and Jenny fully rejected the state's death certificates. They erected a massive billboard on Route 16 featuring the faces of their 5 missing children, offering a significant reward, and maintained it for decades. They hired private detectives, chased leads across the country, and wrote to the FBI. But George passed away in 1969, and Jenny followed 20 years later, neither ever learning what actually happened that Christmas Eve. If the children had died in the fire, the family could have grieved and found closure. But the total lack of physical remains left George and Jenny trapped in a lifelong purgatory of hope, wondering every day if their children were out there, alive, living under entirely